Hello there, my name is Thomas Nowotny and I'm the Director of Research and Knowledge Exchange at the School of Engineering and Informatics here at the University of Sussex. Today I want to tell you a little bit about open access and why it has become important to us recently. And I'll use for this presentation that the team at the library at the University of Sussex has put together for us. With that, let's delve right into it. What is open access? Well, open access is when scholarly work is freely available to everyone. That's typically online, and people can just freely download without any subscription or charge or anything of that kind. Now, what are the routes to open access? There are two different routes, and they have been given these fancy color names. So there is the green open access here at the top. In this case, a version of the work is published by the author of the work online, for example, in Sussex Research Online, our institutional repository, or in any other repository that might be subject-specific. And that's typically done after a certain embargo period has passed that is imposed by the journal. Whereas gold open access, here at the bottom, is when the published version that the journal owns is immediately made accessible freely and openly on the journal's website. This typically incurs a fee, an open access charge, or sometimes it's called an APC. Now, if you want to go the green route of open access, you need to keep hold of your accepted manuscript. You might want to do that anyway. And then you add it to Sussex Research Online at the point of acceptance. So typically, you would get an acceptance email, and then you action to deposit it on Sussex Research Online. And then Sussex Research Online, the team there will apply the necessary embargo periods and take care of the rest. Adding the accepted manuscript to Sussex Research Online has also other benefits. It makes it better accessible to people, and so might also benefit your work in other ways. Now, if you decide to go the gold route, then the journal makes the article fully open access, and you will have to pay the access charge. That can take two different forms. So there are typical open access journals like PLOS or Excursions, some of the Frontiers journals and others. And in this case, the whole journal is open access, and they have all authors pay a certain open access fee for each of the publications. Or you might have a traditional journal that has more a subscription model. Then in this case, you can pay for the individual article to open access on top of what the journal otherwise does. Now, why do we need to know all this? The reason why it has come into the public eye, as it were, recently, is that funders, research councils, but also charities or the EU have put a rule in place that works have to be open access if they originate from their funded work. And HEFCE, the Higher Education Funding Council in England, has also announced a policy that if you want to use the work in the future research excellence framework, then journal articles and conference proceedings that have been accepted after a certain cutoff date will also have to be open access. This cutoff date is the 1st of April 2016. Now, let's have a bit of closer look at these mandates, because they do, of course, as was expected, differ between the different funders and HEFCE and the other entities involved. So let's have a first look at the RCUK open access mandate. Now, the RCUK open access mandate is about the open access of the work itself, and it has different maximum embargo periods that are imposed onto the works, depending whether it's science or it's more in the humanities area. So the science research needs to be open access after 6 months, and the other humanities type research needs to be accessible after 12 months. Now, we can comply with a green or a gold policy, and Sussex typically prefers to go green, but we need to make sure that the embargo periods are such that the green option is actually a valid option. When we do this, then we need to make sure that the funder is acknowledged And that includes a certain sentence that all funders require, and that includes the grant code. And we need to make sure that all supporting data is included in the article, or at least there is a link to where it can be found. The typical sentence that is required by the RCK funders is down here, and it just basically says, this work was supported by, and then there is the council. It could be engineering and physical research council, or here an example, arts, humanities, economic, and social research council, and then in brackets the grant number. Furthermore, if you now go the gold option, it is important that you also have the right license with it. So you see the rules aren't easy. The right license here is the CC BY license. So this is Creative Commons BY license. And it is important to check that the funders offer this kind of license with their gold access. This license, by the way, it allows others to distribute, remix, tweak, and build upon your work, even commercially. But that's the kind of license that is required by the funders. OK, now, there is funding to support the gold open access if the work was funded by the RCUK. And that works through the library. The library has a block grant, and the authorization to use that block grant is given by the head of school or director of research and knowledge exchange. That would be me in the case of engineering informatics, to release those funds for individual articles. The researchers should get in touch with us and with the library as soon as possible to make sure that this process can be done in time. The RCUK expects actually only about 53% compliance by 2014-15, so by this academic year. And Sussex has been much better than that so far. But in the future, we will be expected to comply with almost all the works, basically. So it is important to keep the open access in mind if you're funded by the research councils, and to follow these rules that I've outlined so far. Now, if this work was not funded by the research councils, then you have an option to potentially not make it open access. But if you then would want to have it included in the ref, which we definitely would want to for any good work, it still would need to comply with the requirements of HEFKI, to which I come in a moment. In that case, the open access fund of the research councils could not be used, so other money would have to be found if the open access is to be gold, or it needs to be done in a green route that doesn't incur any extra costs. Now, so what is the requirement from HEFKI for the next research excellence framework? Well, HEFKI has just announced this about a half year ago, and it has different elements. And as I pointed out earlier, the rules are slightly different than for the research councils. HEFKI has a couple of requirements that have to do with the open access, as we talked so far, of the final output, but then also of the open access deposit requirements of the work before it's even fully published. And I'll come to that in a minute. Now, first of all, we need to worry about which kind of outputs are covered by this. And these are outputs for any journal article or conference proceeding that has an ISSN. And in addition, it just comes into play at 1st of April 2016. And this date is going to be applied for the acceptance date of the publications. So for anything that's accepted on or after 1st of April 2016, it will have to comply with the rules I'll outline now. Now, these rules come in two stages. So there's stage 1, which is a deposit requirement. Now, what is that? Basically, a deposit requirement is that the work has to be deposited in a repository, typically an institutional repository like Sussex Research Online, after it has been accepted. And there is a 3-month window in which you can achieve that. And the version that's deposited must be the final peer-reviewed text, but obviously not necessarily the typeset version of the journal. The second part of the stage 1 is that there's also a discovery requirement that the metadata, authorship, title, potentially the abstract, must be discoverable at that point when it is deposited. I should point out that the deposit requirement does not mean that it's already available at that time to the public. It just needs to be deposited. And maybe this is a good point to give a quick break to all the rules and make clear that it's understood that there's not necessarily any rationale that we have to understand in this, but it's a rule set that we have to follow if we want to comply with funders and HEFGI. So let's not question the wisdom of depositing things that cannot be accessed. It is the requirement, and we'll have to, unfortunately, to follow that in the future. Now, that's stage one. The stage two then refers to, like I explained with the research councils, to the actual access requirements and the actual open access. So access requirements are, it needs to be open access, so people can access it without charge and download the text and the figures in full. And the access must be fulfilled after a certain maximum embargo period. And this is in the REF situation slightly different than we had it for the funding council. So here it's 12 months for the science type panels, and it's 24 months for the other humanities type panels, C and D. So when in doubt, it's best to look back at this presentation. I have the PowerPoint online as well, so you can always refer back to this. If in doubt about the embargo periods, you can look there, or you can ask the library, because it is confusing that they're all slightly different. Now, this is the full requirement of HEFGI, and they have already issued a warning that if the outputs are not compliant with these requirements, then they cannot be used in the REF, or if you try to use them, then they will get a non-rated ranking, which would be a bit of a disaster, to be honest. Now, what does non-compliance mean? Well, non-compliance would be if the output is submitted and it was within the definition I gave, journal articles or conferences with ISSN, and it wasn't fully compliant with the criteria that we just discussed. Yeah, and then it gets the unclassified score. This is the worst kind of result that we could hope for. Now, a couple of example titles. I'm wrapping it up slowly now. Here's a couple of journals. There's Trends of Cognitive Sciences. It's an Elsevier journal, and you would have an embargo period of 12 months. So it's not suitable to do green open access for the RCUK, but yes, it would be okay for the REF. And here's an example of a price. It might cost $5,000 with the CC BY license. And another example here, Cambridge Journal of Economics. You see embargo period of 24 months. Well, this would probably be a journal that's relevant to the panel C and D, so it might be okay for the REF, but it's not good for the RCUK, and here the price is slightly different. These examples are just to show that it might be quite difficult to sift through all the rules and see what is it compliant with and what is it not. So the best strategy really is to ask the library at this point, and then decide where to publish. Now, last but not least, not even last, next to last but not least, Horizon 2020 EU funding. Here we also have a requirement, and this requirement is that all peer-reviewed research outputs included in open access requirements. So anything that's peer-reviewed needs to be open access if it was funded by the EU. There are also, again, embargo periods, and they match the ones from RCUK. So that's 6 months for science, 12 months for the humanities. And the gold charges can be reimbursed, but here the mechanism is different. You need to include costs for doing this onto your grant proposals, and then use those funds if the grant is given to you. Now, finally, last but not least, the Charities Open Access Fund. There are various requirements of the charities as well. So, for example, from the Wellcome Trust or Leverhulme Trust to make papers open access, and they have their own Charities Open Access Fund to do that. Here, a few details here. The deposit of the paper is typically in PMC Europe, PMC standing for PubMed Central, on behalf of the author, and then one can ask for reimbursement of any costs involved with buying a gold open access version from this open access fund, and they're typically quite generous with this. So this is the end of the overview of all the requirements. Now, what are the key messages from this for us as authors? I guess the key messages are that we need to always upload our accepted manuscripts within 3 months of acceptance into Success Research Online, because that's the only way that we can make sure that the ref requirements for depositing are fulfilled. So this is the number one. And it's important to remember it's both the metadata that needs to be entered and the full PDF of the author version that needs to be uploaded. Then from there on out, it's good to talk to the library or talk to me in the school and find out what the options are to make the rest of the open access possible and pay for it. But the first thing to do is not to forget to upload the manuscript. The systems and models are still developing, and we might well have something in place that helps with this requirement when it comes into place next April. But until then, it's good to just build up a good practice of getting acceptance emails and immediately uploading the manuscript onto Success Research Online and looking into the options for the open access. But if you are in doubt and have any questions, contact the library. They have a dedicated email address for open access questions. Contact me. Or if it's about funding, you can also contact the head of school, Diane Minus. If you need other help and guidance, here are a couple of websites that you can look at. And I wanted to highlight in this list the Sherpa Romeo service. So this can be accessed through the library. And it's a very helpful tool to find out what the different journals are like in terms of their requirements with embargo periods, for example, and what licenses they give. This is a database that gives you the information what each journal allows and doesn't allow without you having to sift through their journal's policy in detail. So this is a good starting point if you have several journals you consider to find out which are the options for open access in these different journals. That's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. This is my email address. And you can contact me there at any time. Thank you very much.